Then I saw her face. Now I'm a believer. Not a trace of doubt in my mind.
Micky Dolenz of the Monkees, today on Pop Goes the Culture. I am David Levin, and welcome to another overwrought episode of Pop Goes the Culture. Well, they weren't the Beatles, but in the 1960s, they played them, kind of, on TV. Hey, they were the Monkees, and today, my guest is the guy who sang lead on so many of the Monkees hits, Micky Dolenz.
Prior to the Monkees, a lot of people aren't aware, maybe some people are, but you had a TV series before the Monkees, even?
Yeah, I had a television series called Circus Boy, NBC show. Same company that Columbia Television, Screen Gems Television, that did the Monkees, actually, years later. I was 10 years old about, but I'd actually already been in the business for a while even then. My father and my mother were both in the business. My father was an actor, so my first screen test, I was 6. Actually, I have some prenatal work also that's coming out on ultrasound now.
You're going to do the DVD commentary?
Yeah. So yeah, the Circus Boy was my first series, and I played this little kid in the circus. And Corky, yeah. Had a pet elephant named Bimbo. A wonderful show with Robert Lowry Jr. and Noah Berry and Pidge Williams, Big Boy Williams, and it was a great show.
Wow. That's that little extra bit of trivia that we try to go for.
Yeah, it was a great little show.
So how did the Monkees come about for you?
Well, for me, I don't know to be honest, I don't know how the Monkees came about originally with the producers. It wasn't even called the Monkees, because when I went for my first audition, my first interview, the script had a different name, so I don't know when they came up with the name the Monkees. For me, I was an actor with an agent, and I got a call, and I went in for an audition, an interview. But I remember even at the very early stages that there was something different about the spirit and the kind of atmosphere around the show. It wasn't your typical, well, for starters, the producers, Bert Schneider and Bob Ravelson, were not much older than I was. You know, they were, I was early 20s, and they were maybe late 20s, early 30s, and that was unheard of at the time. You know, usually television producers were, you know, big fat guys with suits and smoking a cigar. I wonder what the kids will like this season. I don't know. And these two guys were like wearing jeans and T-shirts. I thought they were there for the auditions themselves, and they were the producers. And I could tell, though, it was a lot about spontaneity and a lot about improvisation. I did read from a script, but like I say, I don't remember the name of the show at the time or the character. Characters had names, you know, Biff and Bill and Bingo and Zingo and Charlie and Fred or whatever. And then we had to come back and do auditions after audition after audition, because you had to be able to sing, you had to be able to play an instrument. I played guitar. One of my audition pieces was Johnny Be Good by Chuck Berry. Then you had to do acting scenes and then improvisational scenes. And it was extensive. You know, it was a lot like, now that I look back, it was a lot like the way you'd cast a musical. Because now I've been in musicals, and I've actually even cast musicals, and it was a similar kind of a feeling. It wasn't just reading a script across a desk, which is typical of most television shows. It was like casting a musical. You had to be able to do it all for real, and sing and dance and play, and you know, so I presume that's what they had in mind right from the get-go. Because that's in a way what the Monkees was this like Marx Brothers musical on television. In fact, I think it's probably much closer to the Marx Brothers than it was the Beatles. In fact, it was John Lennon who made that comparison very early on. He's the first one that, long before I did. He said, I like the Monkees, I like the Marx Brothers. Terrible John Lennon accent. You get the idea, right?
When did you find out you got the part? What was that like?
I don't remember much about it. I'd been up for 2 or 3 series that year that were music-based. My agent must have called me one day and said, you got the pilot. But I knew that from a pilot to a series on the air is a long way. And so I was excited. It was like, oh, cool, I got the pilot. But I wasn't counting my chickens, because I knew that most pilots were made and don't sell. And the Monkees very nearly didn't sell. It was very close. But I'd been up for another couple of shows that year. One was like a Peter, Paul, and Mary kind of act on the road or something. Another one was like a big Cowsills family, Randy Christie minstrels. The Christie minstrels, which became like the Partridge Family eventually. A Beach Boys kind of a show. So there was other companies trying to get other music, pop kind of oriented shows on the air, but the Monkees is the only one that actually made it that year. So my agent called and must have said, you got the pilot.
Everybody was trying to capitalize on the whole Beatles craze at that point, Beach Boys.
Well, more than just the Beatles. It was just the whole pop youth, the pop youth rock and roll craze. I mean, it hadn't kind of stopped since the 50s with Elvis Presley and all the, and even the doo-wop, and even, it was just this continuous thing. But the British invasion, of course, had a lot to do with it. But also, so did the folk music invasion, not invasion, but the whole folk thing that went from Guthrie then into the Kingston Trio, which became more pop, into the big Cowsills kind of, folk rock bands, which was even pre-Beatles. So, because I was in those groups before the British invasion, it was like the folk acts, the Smothers Brothers, and that kind of, folk music, and then which became folk rock, and then became the Byrds and all of that. So I was in bands like that and groups like that, a couple times, and so it was there. The story I heard is that the producers of the Monkees had an idea for like a folk group kind of show, but couldn't sell it, and then the Beatles and the British invasion came along, so they said, hey, give them long hair and put them in bell-bottoms and then play pop music and it'll work. I don't know how true that is, but that's kind of what happened.
Did you hear about some of the people who were not cast in the show?
There's a lot of rumors going around. The only one that I know for sure was Stephen Stills. Oh, and Paul Peterson from the Donna Reed show. There were others, I'm sure. There was a rumor that Charlie Manson tried out for the show. I have not been able to confirm that. I fear that is just urban myth. But having said that, he was around at the time hawking his, songs. And with Terry Melcher, that whole period of time, he was out there on the streets trying to sell songs, trying to, be a singer-songwriter. Maybe it was being rejected by the Monkees that, No, can you imagine? Can you imagine that? Mike, Davey, Mickey, and Charlie. Another Pleasant Valley Sunday.
So pleasant. Yeah.
That would have been strange.
Oh my God. Give me meaning to cheer up Sleepy Jean. Anyways. Do you remember meeting the other guys?
Vaguely. In the audition, did you mean? Yeah. I remember Davey, to be honest. I don't remember Mike and Peter. And I remember Davey because we had similar backgrounds. He'd been on Broadway and done television as a child star. And I'd done the same. So we immediately sort of hit it off, and just in terms of our histories and commonality and stuff. Oh, did TV, did shows, did stuff. Oh, it was great. And we also hit it off comedically, because we were the two that had by far had the most experience in anything, basically. Because when it got down to the last 16, it was like American Idol, except without all the people in the show and the judges and the
humiliation.
And the humiliation. Yeah, there was no humiliation. Real auditions don't happen like that. They just go, "Thank you. Yes, we'll call you."
Nobody says you suck.
No, nobody says anything. You walk, I have no clue. And there's only people there, a few smelly electricians. Nothing against smelly electricians, but. So I do remember David because we had a lot in common, and we also kind of connected. We had acting, experience, and so they gave us script, and some of the other interviewees were like, "What's this? What do you do with that?" And Davey and I got scripts and we worked on them and we kind of came up with improvisational stuff and we clicked. And I'm sure that's probably one of the reasons because that's, I think, what they were looking for more than anything else, was this sort of chemistry kind of thing.
For the audience, because it's like people don't really, I think, get how revolutionary the show was especially for television. I mean, there had been the Beatles movies and there had been the Marx Brothers, but this is pre-Laugh-In, this is pre-MTV, this is pre-Sesame Street. The editing was bizarre. There was, pre-Benny Hill. I mean, all that stuff.
Well, Timothy Leary, in a book he wrote called The Politics of Ecstasy, devoted part of a chapter to the Monkees bringing long hair in the living room. And again, I didn't think about this until years later. But essentially, at that period in time, 1965, because the auditions were in 65, the Beatles were, of course, around and huge. And pop music was, and hippies were, and long hair, and bell-bottoms. But the only time you saw those characters, those people, young boys and girls with long hair and bell-bottoms, the only time you saw them on television was in the news because they were being arrested. And for either, some political thing or crimes against nature or something. So when the Monkees came along, it was, from what I hear, a very tough sell to get NBC, a network, to buy in to this, what was at the time, the counterculture. And it was a real counterculture. There was people being arrested and shot, and, it was a very, very definite counterculture. And but along come the Monkees, who have long hair and bell-bottoms, but they're just nice guys. There's nothing political about it, nothing. And we tried at times to get, political, social stuff, but the NBC censors, and I'm glad, because it wouldn't have been appropriate, and that's one of the reasons I think the Monkees has sustained for so long, is that it wasn't topical. Whereas like Laugh-In, which was a great show, but you had to be there that week to get all the references. With the Monkees, it was non-topical. It was, like the Marx Brothers in a way, it was really nothing topical or timely about it. So the NBC didn't want to put the show on the air. They were frightened of it. They were frightened of having four young guys with long hair and bell-bottoms as masters of their own destiny. They wanted an adult figure in there, my favorite father, uncle, kind of person. And in the pilot, there was a character, our manager, who they had insisted to, go in the pilot. The pilot tested terribly until Bob Rafelson, I understand, basically edited the manager out of the show and included a lot of improvisation that we'd done, interviews and stuff. And it tested much better, and then they eventually sold it. So, yeah, at the time, as you say, there was of course movies, but the Monkees kind of did to the hippie pop culture, which already existed, the sort of the same thing that Will Smith did to the rap culture with Fresh Prince. Sort of homogenized it, made it okay, to be black and a rapper. You can still be a very nice person. And in a funny way, the same thing that Fonzie did to the leather coat, Marlon Brando, Wild Ones kind of motorcycle 50s bad boy, delinquent. Made that okay, because he was a nice guy. And and the Monkees, I think, ultimately, sort of did the same thing. Brought long hair into the living room, because then all the kids around the country, the millions of just nice kids that were just wearing the clothes and the gear and wearing their hair long, said, "Mom, look, see? The Monkees are nice guys, and they're just living alone and playing music, and they're not committing crimes against nature. And so, what's the matter?
At least not at 7:30 on a Monday night.
Yeah, what's the problem?"
It's hilarious. Now,
what's hilarious is my wife was like a 6-year-old watching that show.
Little did you know.
No, no idea.
Little did you know.
Little did I know.
Well, they're talking about crimes against nature. We'll come back to the crimes against nature. So, Tell me about, like everybody sort of, the Monkees didn't play their own stuff. And blah, blah, blah. But the fact is that to a certain extent, at a certain point you did. But could you sort of walk me through the process of how you became more musically involved, what the beginning was in the pilot, and sort of...
Well, yeah, it was simply, the fact of the matter is that even though the producers had made sure that everyone could play and sing, I played guitar. I believe, and I'm not sure because I wasn't there, when they hired us, the record producers and that side of the business just said, we don't need these guys to do anything except stand up there and mime, basically, because I think they were looking at it from the old Hollywood kind of point of view, like in Hollywood movies, where when, Salmenio was playing Gene Krupa, he didn't play the drums, obviously, he had stand-ins, or when, Natalie Wood was in West Side Story, she didn't sing a note. So I think there might have been a little bit of that mentality that, well, we don't, if they do it, fine, if they don't, it doesn't matter. But the problem was that they cast 4 guys that could sing and could play. So right from the get-go, there was a conflict. There was a storm brewing, especially with Mike and Peter, because they were and are first-class musicians. But even with David and I, Peter tells the story of going into the studio, the recording studio, during one of the early sessions, and with his guitar, and they said, "What are you doing here?" So the fact of the matter was they did not allow us to play early on. It didn't bother me as much as it did Mike and Peter, who eventually, Mike especially, just took them right to the wall, and very early on. And we sort of won by striking, by threatening, by a lot of other stuff. We won the right to control it all, because not only did they not let us in the studio sometimes, we couldn't pick the songs, we had nothing to say about the album covers or the liner notes, because we were hired actors, musicians, to play these parts. But clearly that is not what destiny had in hand for us. Like I say, Mike was really the one that was really pushing, because he wanted his songs and his music and his vocals. So that didn't last. In terms of how long, that didn't last very long. When they cast the pilot, by the time they'd cast us in the pilot, they'd already started prepping the pilot, and they had to have music for the songs, and so they were already recording music. And at that time also, even in the recording industry, and I'm not telling any tales out of school now, because now it's become general knowledge, a lot of bands that were just bands, like the Byrds and the Beach Boys and the Mamas and Papas and were using studio musicians. That's not general knowledge to everybody, but certainly is within the industry. There was a very famous group of musicians here called the Wrecking Crew in Los Angeles. Hal Blaine, Glenn Campbell, Tommy Tedesco, and all these incredible musicians. And all the acts, even if they did know how to play, like the Byrds, they were pretty accomplished musicians, but they didn't play on Tambourine Man. They hired, you didn't know that? And the Beach Boys didn't play on any of their stuff because they could play on the stage live, but when you go in the studio, it was a very different kind of set of techniques. There's a wonderful documentary and a book out called The Wrecking Crew, and it explains that. And they would bring in studio cats to do the tracks for the session, because it's a very different very different set of techniques and disciplines to record in a studio as opposed to playing live. And these studio musicians couldn't have gone out and played live. Right. They were studio cats. And so some of the early Monkee stuff was done in the same way, as was the Beach Boys and the Byrds and the Mamas and Papas, and the list goes on. Believe me, it just goes on and on and on. And in the case of the Monkees, of course, because of the television show and because of all the publicity, that little secret got out, compounded by the fact that we actually did want to play and we wanted to be in the studio. And by the 3rd album, I think it was, we had demanded and got total control over every single thing that happened in the world of the music. And it was great. It was great fun.
That's all we've got time for today. In part 2, Micky Dolenz talks about some of the legendary songwriters who composed the hits for the Monkees, including Carole King, Neil Diamond, David Gates, Harry Nilsson, and you'll find out what happened when a monkey finally met a Beatle. Join me, okay? Till then, I'm David Levin. Thanks for watching.
Ouch! Oh.